Okay, should we start? Let's start with some of the... First, I'd just like to thank all of you for coming, the guys that have come from over east, and all of you guys for taking your time. We appreciate it. It's not easy to do. We'd like to thank CSBP for letting us have it here. So all the CSBP guys, thanks for that. We're going to try and keep today as informal as possible. None of us are professional speakers, so as much interaction as you can give us in it, I think will benefit us and benefit us all if we can ask questions and talk and stop and start. We're going to try recording this, and which is why we have to run the resolution on 1024 by 768, otherwise it takes too long to record it. So Mark's upset because his XAML stuff doesn't look really as nice on this resolution, but that's tough. So bear with that, and we'll see if we can put it on the web. Christo will try and get some of the feeds in, and we'll be able to download some of the more technical talks so that the guys in the States or guys that couldn't make it can see the things. What we'll do, my mouse will work. What we're going to try and achieve today is we're going to look at MacroView as a product. We're going to talk about some of the future directions. Various people, guys from you, Chris and Brett, are going to talk about what they've been doing with MacroView as a product. I think we should have open up the floor at certain points and talk about one of the things that I think is worthwhile mentioning is if daylight savings does come into WA, I think we need to be prepared, and from a production point of view, if you guys have got reports, are we going to keep to standard time? Are we going to shift? If you're going to shift, what are you going to lose, and what is going to happen? So just to be aware of that. The talk that I'll be giving is about 20 minutes or so, and I'll be talking about what's happened in the last 12 months. We'll be talking about some major company changes. What we've done, I'll just briefly touch on the development, and then Aplon is going to take that to a much deeper level. We'll talk about some enhancements, and there's a very short section on both places, and there's some examples. One of the biggest things in the last 12 months is we now have a building. We're in Balcutta now, and so if you're ever in the area, drop in and have coffee. It's just down from Bunnings in Balcutta. Another major change is Mark Martin has joined us in the last 6 months. He's been fairly busy in the last 6 months. He started up Fortnum, which was shut down for 6 years, was it? So he went and he got it running from the PLC to the Cytec, I think they were using, and a lot of the electrical stuff. So he worked with that. He's done a lot of the XAML work. Apple and I thought it would be good to use someone like Mark to do the XAML sort of testing, and he'll talk about stuff he's done because he doesn't have. He's more as a user as opposed to a developer. We've done a whole lot of work for Alinta or AGL or APT, or Neil can give us a half an hour talk on what they're called. He's done quite a lot of work on the CSVP in the PLC and the MacroView arena. We've got a web page, which we'll talk about later, that Mark was got it all working and it's looking good. And he's just done some work for Overflow, for Laminex, and that's just an example of a graphic that has been developed in the last few weeks using Studio for the dryer. So the Laminex guys and Barry can give us more information. But that's good. We have a new web page. I don't know if you've all seen it and been to it, but the nice thing about it, it's in our office. So if we want to put downloads on and stuff, we can. The place we were hosting with before, we had a 30 megabyte limit, which was very restrictive. It also has a forum. I think it's going to be quite useful. If you guys can use it, it would be really good. If you find a problem or an issue, stick it on the forum. It's got a really nice search engine on it. I know that I do things and think I need to put this somewhere, so if this problem comes up again, I can remember it. And if we put it in the forum, then we can all benefit from it. Register, and hopefully it'll become more used as we go on. I will try and put things on at least once or twice a month in the stuff that we're doing, so you can keep it up to date. Questions? Forums? No? It's all good? In the development, the MacroView development in the last 12 months has been mainly in the one of the main areas has been the MacroView Windows desktop, which Aplon's going to talk more about. We've done work in getting the VNC to work, and Tony Watts has recently looks after a fairly small customer in Wongan Hills, which is about a 2.5-hour drive north, and he's got a 24K modem link. That's the only link into the site. And I have his stats to run, he had Sigwin and running X over Sigwin, so you could look at the MacroView graphics. And for example, to start up the Navigator using Sigwin was taking 370 seconds to start up the Navigator. So he was in our office the other week, and we said, well, why don't you stick the server, meta server on the Wongan Hills server, which is running SCO, and run the VNC demo inside the Windows desktop. And now the Navigator starts up in 9 seconds. So you can see that the difference is, and to run a trend or call up alarms was 195 seconds, and with the VNC it's down to 12 seconds. So it's a really good way of accessing information remotely. It's relatively simple to deploy. All you need to run is a server, a meta server on the MacroView server machine, and then you just run the Windows desktop, and it's just like the studio. It's another tab. We'll see more of that. XAML, Mark, and Aplon will cover that more. We've released a new version, 3.12. Aplon's done a lot of development on a Cymax driver that Chris was hopefully going to touch on a bit later. There'll be more on that. We ported the driver to run on the Bailey driver to run on Linux, which is not too much. And there's some OPC that CSBP have some requirements for, and we're doing some work on that driver. Also developed a thing called the Modbus server, which is a bit of an oxymoron because it's actually Modbus slave, but we'll talk a bit more about that. The version 3.12, what we decided to do is over the last 4 or 5 years, we've done a lot of bug fixes to MacroView. It's much easier for us to support the product if we know what version everyone is using. And we figured that now would be a good time to get a release out and try and get as many people onto it, so that we know that they're running the latest version of all the fixes. If they do phone up with a problem, we know what version it is. We made some fairly key enhancements to it. One of the things we did, we increased the address field from 40 to 100 characters. And any of you guys that have used types in any sort of depth, you run out of space on the address field and you start having to call station name as something very small or doing some really weird things with the offsets. So that's made a big difference. And the other big one is the ability for each type to have its own engineering unit. I'll explain that more. We believe it's worth the upgrade, and I mean, we believe it because it'll make our lives easier to support you guys if you're running the latest version. And anyone that has a maintenance agreement, they get it for free. So all of the guys with maintenance agreements, unless you have any serious concerns about doing it, I would like you to do it. This is an example of I think we got this from AGL. But in the old version, and AGL have this exact problem where they have an entity, and before the version 3.112, each entity can only have one engineering unit. So if you were looking at this in a trend, and the KPA was, and I think in this case it was KPA on this one, all of these things would have been KPA, which is quite confusing for people using the system, because they'll look at something and they'll think, my flow is in KPA, and they'll think, or they'll look at a number and they'll assume, because they see KPA, they'll assume it's in KPA, and they'll see I'm reading like 8.5 KPA, and I know that I should be reading. So this has made a big difference to be able to do this. Brian spent last night, we put this live on KPMS, the power management system here, and he spent the time going through, and it's going to make a big difference to their lives. Yeah. Another thing I'd like to spend some more time on in the next 12 months is trying to get these reports out. It's actually a very powerful reporting package. We haven't sold it very well, and we haven't spent much time on it. But if you have any production reports, these are not reports that change often. I mean, this is one we did for a demonstration for St. Barbara's, and I was quite impressed as to how quickly and easy it was to put it together and how you can make it look good. Every gold mine is interested in every shift or every day, however they do their times, what the conveyor tons are and what the mill tons are. So if you guys have got any reports in your production systems that are fairly fixed, they're not going to change that often, this is a very nice way to distribute that information to users. They can click on the report, run it, they can specify the dates, and they can get the information in meaningful ways. That's something I'd like to spend more time on in the next 12 months because I think it's a sort of an underutilized area of MacroView. We'll talk a bit more about this Modbus. Please excuse the slide, it was late. But if you have a scenario where you've got a MacroView server, and this one's talking to an ADSL router and a modem, but let's just assume that it was talking to some PLCs in the top there, and you wanted to make that information available to other devices. You can run this Modbus server, which appears as a Modbus slave to any serial port or to a TCP/IP connection. So you can have devices anywhere on the network that can get information out of MacroView. So MacroView just becomes a PLC that you can talk to using Modbus master protocol. Where this initially came from was in the USA. The environmental guys have these, on all these big power stations, have these huge control systems, DCSs, and they need certain information out of the environmental systems. It was very hard traditionally out of SpectraView to get that information to them, and they had to put in wiring, and they had a lot of trouble. And when they do this, it's easy because most of the DCSs have Modbus master drivers. So they just run the Modbus server/slave in the SpectraView system, and then any DCS can connect to it, just like it's another PLC out there, and get information from it.
So how do you set that up? So you just set up a block of addresses that they can get to?
Any address that's in there is available.
You can restrict that?
No. It's just like a PLC.
Okay. I'd have to look how we do it. I'd be interested in doing something.
But you would set it up from a driver. So your driver on the DCS side, you would restrict it, I'm guessing, by what blocks you look at. But I don't believe it's restricted.
No, it's not restricted, but that would be difficult to add.
Yeah, okay. Sounds good. So
One of the things that Laminix will, an example of something is that Laminix have several SCO systems, and correct me, Terry, I say this wrong at all, but they have several SCO systems talking to Square D PLCs. And they're just putting in a new MacroView Linux server, and it's going to be talking to a dryer, which is an Allen Bradley Control Logics PLC. Now the dryer, I believe, is in the middle of the process. So it's nice for it to have information on both sides of it. So because it's in the middle, I'm guessing it would like to know what's coming in and what's happening on either side of it. Now, if they want to get the information from the Squareys into the Allen Bradley Control Logics, they could wire it up, which would be expensive, and it would take I/O on both the Squareys and on the Control Logic side. What they can do is they can run the Modbus server on any of the SCO systems that are talking to the Squareys, and then all they do is they can collect any real-time information inside the MacroView server using this protocol to get the information. Does that make sense? Yes? It's looking very blank out there. Yeah?
Thanks, early.
No, it's a really nice way to distribute information out of MacroView from device to device. You don't have to, we use FTP to send files. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful ways, but this is nice because it just appears as another PLC device that you can communicate to.
Can you write?
Yes.
Yes.
You can.
There's an echo.
By default it's off, but there's a command line switch. Just turn off.
So how do you equate your Modbus addressing,
There's a
which is the
mapping.
4000 and all that sort of shit, to say Square D or Control Logic, for instance?
Depends on the PLC, but there's a mapping thing, and I'll actually be going through it in one of
Yeah,
the...
Applon is going to cover this more in technical. I'm just trying to get the concept, because when Applon talks about it technically, if you can get what we're doing here, it's going to be easier. Okay, so we've done quite a lot of work in the alarms area. A lot of one of the things we did for Simon in the KPMS, they've got two MacroView servers running the power management system here, and they're identical. They don't know each other's there. They're absolutely hot, redundant, whatever it is, servers. So if one fails, they just operate on the other one. One of the problems that Simon had was they've got speakers that run from the MacroView servers into the control room, and if they silenced one, the other speaker would continue. And it was a real pain because they'd have to silence it in both MacroViews. So what Applin did was he made it so that the buzzer turns on when a bit is set on in the PLC, which is really simple and a really good way of doing it. So if anybody silences it, it sets the buzzer PLC bit to 0, and then everybody shuts up. And it's worked seamlessly since we put it in. In fact, Another thing we did on the text messages side. My mouse would work. No, go away. We added the ability to change alarm fields in the message.ms. And I know this doesn't sound like it would be useful, but actually it is, because you can do some really cool things with alarms. This is just an example. Like if an alarm comes in, message.ms is the process that when an alarm occurs, message.ms runs. You can do things with message.ms, and then it ends up in the alarms databases. So in the message.ms, for example, you can say if the superfind tag for that alarm is alter test, you can blank it out, you can set the uppercase for the alarm set, you can add one to the color, so the color number will be incremented by 1, and you can uppercase the expression. So when that information ends up in the alarms databases, that can be changed. So it's just quite nice to know that you've got more control over the alarms. The ADO, more and more people are getting a MacroView Linux server in a central location, and they're using that to back up all of their MacroView servers if they've got more than one. CSPP did it, Iluka's done it, AGL is going to do it, I think that's been approved. And this is a really good way it's a really good system for a number of reasons, that if you've got a central Linux server with all of the configurations, and if you have any problems, if you lose a file, you can get it with the central one. If your system crashes, you can rebuild it, and all of the information is on the central one. And the other one is, because hard disks are so small, you can keep all of the historical information. It's CSPP on our, how many systems, Brian? 43 systems. And how many, that's 43 servers, and how many actual?
36 servers.
36 servers and 43 systems, that's different MacroDoers, all exist on one Linux server down there. So, for example, remember last year at Orb's talk where he was writing that ADO, we could go and get historical information from all the production servers. Because you can change the MacroDo now, you can access all of that information from this central server, which is good in a number of ways. It means that you're not hitting the production machines, and so you're reducing in some of the, especially Luca, the machines are on a wide area network, and so it's much quicker, and you can keep years and years. In fact, we're keeping the CSPP 1-minute history for all of those 43 systems forever. So if anybody ever comes back to us at any point in time, we can give them the 1-minute trend historical information. It's like a sort of a simple data historian, and the ability to change the MacroDo inside ADO is going to give us more and more access to production guys accessing historical information through that. Reduces the load, you can keep more historical information. I don't know if any of you use it, but the JAG, I needed something to put it up. The JAG Extreme driver, we can talk to one Weybridge. I'm not sure how many of you guys use Weybridges out there. Oh, maybe you do. The change alarm, Brian Marshall had a good point about, we have an alarm which is in a change alarm that says the number is changed to this. So, for example, if you get a message saying the number's changed to 10, well, if the previous number was 11, it might not be too much of an issue. But if the previous number was 300, it could be quite a serious production issue. And prior to this, you had to go into the trends and try and find out what the value was previous to that. So Applin added a value and a previous value. Unfortunately, we have to sort of put it around to keep it to be backwardly compatible. But for example, this would result in an alarm text message saying that this entity, the voltage, the value of 12, and it was previously 10. So you've now got that on your change alarm. This is something that I was very pleased to get. It's setval and getval, which are two little programs that you can manipulate real-time values, and now you can use the entity.attribute format instead of the attribute underscore entity format, which just makes my life more simple. Something that Orb came up with, he was doing some alarm rationalization, and he wanted to know how many times, if there were any problem alarms on the system. So between Orb and Mark and I, we put together this little package that it'll run on any MacroView system. All it needs is an alarms database that hasn't been changed too significantly. And you can run it, and it'll tell you the number of occurrences of the alarms in the system. So, for example, on this one here, you've got 560. This alarm here occurred 560 times. The alarm underneath it occurred 11 times. Now, either you've got a process problem, or there's something wrong with that alarm if it's occurring that number of times, or you're doing something wrong if it's in that sort of state. But it's just very useful if you want to do any alarm rationalization on any system. And it's simple to load. It's just that you put it in a database. Here's the short section on bug fixes.
On that alarm, can you select the time window that you're looking at? Or is it just the alarm database that's in the machine at the time that you do the store?
Which version have you got, Paul?
One that we've got, we've just set it to configure for the last 24 hours so they can do a daily check on it. But you can put a field in where you can go back.
It would be very simple to add fields to say, if you could say 24 hours. I mean, most alarms, depending how you've got the alarms database configured, there's not normally that number of alarms in there anyway. But yes, you can.
Does it work off the historical alarm message database or the alarm database?
Historical.
This messages can be.
It can work off anything, but I think it works off, you could get it to work off anything you want to. It's all the same field. In fact,
So it's off his messages because that top
Yeah.
one's log only.
I think it is. Yes, it is. It is his messages, because when you clear an alarm, it disappears off the alarm, so it wouldn't be that one. It would be off his messages. Yes.
That's when we developed last year, the ADO one.
Yep.
You can actually use that to go back into your history folders wherever you've got them hidden.
Yes, you can.
And specify dates, times,
And,
whatever you want to
and
do.
priorities as well. You can say, I'm only interested in, I mean, you could, look, you can add buttons onto this thing that comes up. You know, you could say, I'm interested in emergencies or alarms or warnings, or I don't want to look at log only, or I'm only interested in an alarm that's more important than an alarm or a warning or something like that. BlueScope Steel that use MacroView, they don't like rebooting the servers. They've got these fairly large DEC alphas, and they're fairly large and they're new and they're powerful, and they run a lot of modelling software. And when they reboot the computer, there's the models get themselves into a bit of a state. So they never like rebooting the MacroViews. So they leave these things running all the time. But when they change an address field, we always just, my thing is just to reboot the computer if you change the address field, but you don't have to. And there was a problem with shared memory on the PCCC driver that we fixed that enabled them to restart the driver, so they never have to reboot their servers. Their servers are just basically running 24/7. VRT found an issue with the system ID when you print it. I don't know if you remember, David Wood, when you print a graphic, it returns an ID, so it knows which one to grab. Most of us, when we want to print something, we use VNC or some getting into Windows and printing it from there, but they still use that. Loyang, Dave found a problem with the Windows wrapper service, which is the wrapper service that sort of runs the services for MacroView. If you've got a log file, it just grew and grew and grew. And they found ways around it, but we've still got to go in and give it some way of saying, I don't want this file to get bigger than 30K or whatever it is, and keep it to that size. The CCS driver rights, Applin will talk about this a bit more, but there's a USA company, not the environmental guys, another one, I think they produce building materials. They use MacroView, and they've got a Yokogawa DCS, and how they do their reporting is at the end of every shift, they write zeros to the totalizers. They read them. When they've got a successful read, they write zeros back to the totalizers, and then the new shift starts. And they had a problem where it would run fine for a couple of days, and then the writes would just stop working. And it was a very hard one to try and test and debug for us, because the time zones, it's a long way away. The CCS drivers that we have here, talking to Yokogawa, we prohibit any writing to happen, so that we know that if anything does get turned on, it's not by MacroView. And I couldn't really go to CSPP and say, look, we want to start writing to your DCS to test it. So Applin wrote a CCS simulator, which was a pretty cool way of doing it. So he simulated a Yokogawa, and we fixed it, and they're very happy. In fact, that's on the forum. I covered this a bit last time. The Alinta, AGL, APT, whatever they're calling themselves, GGT, let's call it GGT. They've got a fairly unusual scenario, because in terms of SCADA, they're running over a satellite link, and there's these remote places. We'll just take Parabadu as an example. And they've got a serial to Ethernet converter. So they've got which is the C105 is what type of PLC is it? Is it the Allen Bradley, or is it the Babcock, or is it the, whatever it is? and it talks Modbus serial only. So they've got this converted, so all the MacroView sides are sitting on this side of it, and we're hitting this little Ethernet converter, and it's servicing all of our requests to this on a serial line. And there's a MacroView at the actual control station. There's PCC1, which is the master. There's like the production machine, and there's a backup machine, all heading this little device for information. So it's fairly busy on the Ethernet side, and the serial side quite often can't keep up. Now the MQE driver relies on TCP/IP for failures, so it would fail all the time. I mean, literally, all the time. 2 or 3 times an hour, you'd get a comms failure to this particular site, and it's a pain because it fills up the system alarms, and it's quite hard to see if there's a problem because you've got all these damn faults in them. So we use the Modbus DRV there, which has got much better failure handling capability. And since we put it in and run it at C105, we've never, last time I checked, we hadn't had one error C105, so it's made it very clean, and we're going to do that more and more. So all we did with that was create a new source, added the Modbus driver, and it just talks to it on that, which is good. What I end up with, we've done some work on MS Comms. Brett's talk is going to talk a bit more about this, but this is just a program that gives us the ability to write information using M shell out of the serial ports and into the serial ports. And here's just, I was going to finish up with this. This is an example. Last year we showed you, this is the ESD alarms that come into the 2 cyan systems. And what we found was there's a lot of, if you look at this one, there's the same alarm repeated continually. Now this used to be connected up to a dot matrix printer, and if you've got this alarm coming in and out, you can imagine the paper, the pens, and all the paper jamming problems you'd have with this. So just to, I think Vicky one afternoon just created this graphic which brings up the detail of it, and you can type, I think she hacked this out of the alarms code, and you can type in something in the message, and as soon as you click the filter on button, this delete selected becomes active, and if you click on the delete selected, it removes those from it, and then you can see that's a much more meaningful alarm than just a full one of those ones inside there. So that's basically what we've done in the last 12 months and where we're going. Now we're going to turn off the phone. Now Apollon's going to give a talk on the development.
Congratulations.
Okay.